Today I'm going to show you how I shoot and process seascape photography. I'll be going over my camera equipment and show you how I find and compose my shots. After that, I'll be processing the photo in Lightroom and Photoshop. When it comes to equipment for seascape photography, you don't have to have the most expensive cameras. Any interchangeable lens camera with manual shooting modes that can shoot in RAW should do fine. For my setup, I use an inexpensive option because it won't be too much to replace. A good lens is more important than the camera itself. A decent lens will give you a sharp image without too much distortion or aberrations. A wide-angle lens puts emphasis on the foreground. You can still get great photos without a wide angle or even with a kit lens. I use the Rokinon 12mm paired with the Sony a6000. The Rokinon is decently sharp and doesn't break the bank. I find the 3-stop neutral density filter best for my shooting style. I use a Tiffin screw-on filter. Make sure you get the right size for your lens. Seascape photography is about capturing the motion of the water. An ND filter is a must-have so that you can get long shutter speed without overexposing the image. Another thing I find useful is an L bracket. It allows you to change the camera to portrait orientation without having to move the ball head. It keeps the center of gravity to the middle of the tripod and allows you to have the full range of movement on the ball head. One place you don't want to skimp out on is on the tripod and ball head. You should have a decent ball head and tripod legs. A cheap tripod won't be sturdy enough in moving water. The legs should also allow you to change angles so that you can set it to a wider and more stable stance. Carbon fiber tripods with twist locks are a great option because the parts don't corrode. I use a Feisel CB40D ball head and Feisel CT3342 legs. A shutter remote is essential to me. It allows you to trigger the camera without touching the shutter button. This is helpful so that the camera doesn't shake or cause motion blur. The camera settings for shooting seascapes is pretty straightforward. Set your camera to the lowest ISO. I usually shoot my photos in bracketing mode. Don't forget to shoot in RAW. You should be able to set the shutter speed anywhere from 1/4 of a second to 10 seconds and above with an ND filter depending on the time of day. I find 1/4 of a second to 2 seconds is best for capturing the water movement. For focus, find a good balance between focusing on the foreground and focusing on infinity. Set your aperture anywhere between f8 to f16 depending on how long of exposure you want. Try not to go below or above or else your image may not be sharp. Absolutely make sure that the horizon is in good enough focus. I'd rather have my foreground slightly out of focus than have my horizon out of focus. Shoot it in aperture priority mode or manual mode. If you're shooting a single exposure, find the balance between clipping your shadows and clipping your highlights. You can use the histogram to assist you. The best thing to do is shoot as bright of an exposure as you can without clipping too many highlights. Your shadows will look dark, but you can bring them up in post-processing. Composition is the most important part of getting a great shot. The first thing I do is scout for a good composition. Always be mindful of your surroundings. If you go to a location with waves, watch for them a minute to see where they crash and how long the sets take to come in. Beginners tend to set up their camera far away from the water and end up with lackluster shots. You want to get close or go in the water, and just because you're in the water doesn't mean you're going to get a good shot. When I first started, I would just find any old rock and put it in the foreground without paying mind to the movement of the water or how the camera was positioned. You want to find locations where the water is actively moving in and out, places where the water creates rivers and waterfalls. You want to use the movement of the water as a compositional element. I look for areas where the water naturally creates lines and shapes. I know I can capture the movement of the water with a long shutter speed, so I want to position the camera in the best place possible to capture the lines and shapes the water creates. The faster the water moves, the better it will look in your shots. Fast-moving water creates bubbles that appear white in the image. These bubbles are what creates the movement and textures in your photo. You don't necessarily need to use the rule of thirds to get a good composition. I often place the sun in the middle and use the natural lines in the movement of the water to lead the viewer's eye to the sun and clouds. These things can be said about locations without water movement. You can use the shapes, textures, and lines of rocks to create interest. Pools of standing water can create shapes and reflections. Focus on one good composition. If you spend 10 minutes shooting at one spot, you're bound to get some nice water movement in your photo. Timing is important. I find the best water movement happens when the waves are receding. The water flows out quickly, creating rivers and waterfalls. These things happen fast and you want to capture it just at the right moment. Water flowing towards you can also create some nice movement and interesting textures. This sunrise was pretty awesome. It's one of the best sunrises I shot this year. Always pay attention to your surroundings. Safety is your top priority. I had a small wipeout and scrape on the knee from an unexpected wave. I could have avoided it if I hadn't changed to a new composition. Thankfully my camera was okay. Post-processing is an important part of creating a good photo. You can spend a lot of time or a small amount of time and still get good results. It's about turning your image into a finished product. I personally like to process my photos so that they look natural and realistic. That isn't necessarily the best way, so process it to your liking and make it your own style. Composition is objective while post-processing is subjective. During the shoot, keep some wipes or cloths handy. Water spray and water drops on the lens can ruin the photo. Often check your lens and wipe it down when the water gets splashed onto it. I use special task wipes that are super absorbent. All the equipment I talked about are linked in the description. I have my photo open in Lightroom, and it's pretty well exposed. If you look in the histogram over here, it's a good balance between the highlights and the shadows. So there's a tiny bit of clipping in the highlights and just a tiny bit of clipping in the shadows. So this is a perfect exposure. Alright, to get started, I'm going to reduce the highlights so I can get more detail in the sky, and then increase the shadows so that I can get more detail in the dark areas over here. I'm going to increase the contrast a little bit, and then increase the vibrance to around 30. So it's looking a little bit too blue, too much a blue color cast. So I'm going to change the white balance and make it a bit warmer. Alright, that looks good. So I don't usually push any of these sliders too much, and I don't even use clarity, but clarity is a good effect, and just don't push it too far or else you'll get halos around the edges. I'm going to zoom in 100% and sharpen my image until it looks good. I'm also going to go to the lens correction. I'm going to level the image so Lightroom will automatically straighten it so that the horizon is level. I'm going to enable profile corrections, so I'm using the Rokinon 12mm. I'm going to take that vignetting back because I do like it. And I'm also going to make sure to check remove chromatic aberration. Alright, so this image is looking pretty good already, and here's the before and the after. So I pulled out more detail in the sky and more detail in the shadows. So the next thing I'm going to do is open it in Photoshop. So I'm going to right click and edit in Photoshop. Alright, so in Photoshop, I want to bring out more detail in the waters over here. So the lines created by the movement of the water. I also want to increase the contrast of the sky and maybe adjust the color just a little bit. So I'm going to use adjustment layers, and that's what I usually use. I can also find them right here. So I always use adjustment layers, and I don't apply any effects to the image itself so that I don't lose any information when saving it. So that's called non-destructive editing, when you don't do anything to the original image. With this curve adjustment layer, I want to increase the contrast in the sky. So I'm going to use this tool over here. It's called the targeted adjustment tool. And I'm going to go to a bright part of the clouds over here. I'm just going to click, and that will create a point. And then I want to go to a dark part of the clouds like over here and click, hold it down, and bring it down. So this will, you can control the point by moving it up and down. I didn't move the point on this one because I don't want anything to affect the highlights. So I want to keep the highlights at the same brightness, but I want the dark parts to get darker. So this is increasing the contrast, and this is called an S-curve. So if I toggle it on and off, you can see a good difference in the image. The contrast is improved, and it also saturates the colors a little bit. The problem with this is that it's doing it to the entire image, and I don't want the foreground to get darker. So to fix that, I'm going to use the gradient tool, and I'm going to drag from the sky and down, and that will eliminate the foreground. So if I toggle that on and off, you can see it's only affecting the top part of the sky. I actually want it to kind of gradually go into the water over here, so I'm going to pull it down right into here. So I'm going to redo that. Alright, so that's better. And if I go into the mask here, you can see how it gradually goes from white to black. So white means it's going to be visible, and black means it's hiding the adjustment. The next adjustment I want to do is bring out the contrast and brighten up the foreground. So I want to bring out the movement in the water. I want to brighten that up. So I'm going to create another curve adjustment layer, and I'm going to use the targeted adjustment tool and go to a bright area of the water and click on it and bring it up to brighten it. I'm going to go to a dark area of the water and bring it down just to the level of the line, so that I don't really want to darken it. I just want to increase the contrast and brighten up the water. So that did a good job. If I toggle it on and off, it's looking pretty good. So the foreground looks good, but now the sky is too bright. So I'm going to use a gradient tool just like the previous photo. And then I'm just going to gradually bring it up, and I'm just going to bring it a little bit into the sky. And that looks pretty good. I'm just going to increase the brightness just a little bit more. Alright, that's better. The next thing I want to do is bring out these natural water movements of the lines. So I want to bring out the lines over here, and I want to darken this spot over here a little bit because it's kind of distracting. So to do that, I'm going to create a dodge and burn layer. So I'm going to create a new layer, and then I'm going to change the blending mode to soft light. This will allow me to paint on black and white, and it will darken or brighten depending on which one you use. So I'm going to use my brush tool with a low opacity and a hardness of 0%. I'm going to use the color white and then size up or down the brush to a nice size and start brushing along the bright areas. So I want to accentuate the lines in the water. So I'm just going to do a few strokes in those bright areas. And with a low opacity, it allows me to go over several strokes, and it makes it more accurate. So I'm not just doing it all at once. Alright, so the white brush brightens, and I'm going to switch to the black brush, which darkens. So I want to darken some of the darker areas in the water over here, and also these dark parts. And I'm also going to brush along this whole area over here to darken it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm holding down Alt and using the scroll wheel to zoom. And panning, I can hold down the spacebar and move it around. So I'm going to size up the brush. I'm using the bracket keys. And then I'm just going to paint along this whole area over here multiple times. I'm also going to size down the brush, and there's these natural darker parts. I'm just going to bring those out a little bit, so that'll just make it a little bit more texture in the water. Alright, so here's the before and the after. So it's a subtle difference, but it makes a big improvement in the processing and brings out those lines. So that's what I really want. The next thing I want to do is adjust the color a little bit. I like to create a curve adjustment and change the blending mode to color. So with this curve adjustment, it won't affect any of the brightness values or the contrast. I'm going to go to the individual channels and go to the red channel. I like to bring out a little bit more red in the dark areas, like the shadows and the dark area of the water. So I'm going to go to this bottom point and just bring it directly up a little bit. So that just brought out more red in the shadows and dark areas. I also like to go to the blues and do the same thing. So bring out more blue in the dark areas. And for this image, I like it like this. Sometimes I go to the highlights and bring them down, but in this case, I do like the blue parts in the sky. So if I show that before and after, so there's a lot more green right now, but if I bring the red and blue channel up, that'll decrease the amount of green in the dark areas. And that looks pretty good. The final thing I'm going to do is add a vignette. So to do that, I'm going to use the elliptical marquee tool and create an oval over the area I want to keep light. So I'm just going to do a equal oval around the image and create a curve adjustment. So if I have the selection and create the curve adjustment, it'll automatically apply a mask. But with this mask, it's only going to be hidden on the edges. I want it to be darker on the edges, so that means I'm going to invert the mask. So to invert it, I can press Ctrl I, and that will invert the mask. So the next thing I'm going to do is bring it down to the level I want the edges to be darkened. And then I'm going to click on the mask itself and go to the properties and bring up the feathering by a large amount. So now it's gradually becoming darker on the edges. And if I do that, it looks a lot better. So it pulls the viewer's eye into the center of the image and it keeps the eyes from the edges. So you don't want the eyes to wander to the edge. And that's why I compose it so that the water creates lines going towards the center. And that's how I like my compositions and post-processing. So to sum it up, I did some simple processing in Lightroom. So I just reduced the highlights and brought up the shadows. I also increased the vibrance and also the contrast. Then in Photoshop, I brought out the contrast in the sky, and using a gradient tool, I only made it in the sky area of the image. I also brought up the contrast in the foreground and also brightened it. I also used a dodge and burn layer to bring out the lines in the water. I adjusted the color a little bit, brought out more reds in the shadows, and finally a vignette. If you found this video useful, please like, comment, and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.